Brett is a world-renowned futurist and speaker and international best-selling author. He's a media personality who covers the future of business, future of technology, and future of life and society. The Chinese President Xi Jinping cited Brett's book, Augmented, on the topic of AI, artificial intelligence. Brett has spoken in over 50 countries. He's a TED talker. He's a regular television commentator and previously advised the Obama administration on their fintech policy. He also advises regulators and bank boards around the globe on all things technology transformation. Brett hosts the world's first and #1 ranked radio show on fintech called Breaking Banks. It comes to us from 177 countries where it's seen, and he has 6.5 million listeners, which is around the number of viewers tuning in to the Inspire Showcase today, I believe. He is the founder and the executive chairman of Moven, a successful mobile startup. It's raised over $47 million to date with the world's first mobile downloadable bank account. He was shortlisted in 2015 for the Advanced Global Australian of the Year award for being one of the most influential Aussies living offshore. He's good mates with Vladimir Putin. Well, they were once in a conference together, not even at the same stage on the same time, but they were speaking at the same conference, so they're good mates. He's not just a futurist, he's a speaker, a pilot, a gamer, a disruptor, a dad, and the only person on this showcase today with even less hair than me. He still calls Australia home, I'm sure. It is the follically foregoing futurist. All hail the king, Mr. Brett King. And Brett, it is lovely to have you coming to us live from New York. Do you miss us looking at the Opera House behind me? Do you still miss Australia?
Yeah, look, I do. It's almost 21 years now since I've been offshore, so it's a long time between drinks, as they say. I think what I miss is sort of, I guess, the lifestyle choices that you have in Australia, which are a little bit more difficult here. But I don't miss the extra travel I would be doing from Australia if I was based there. So I don't know how Aussie speakers who speak globally do it, frankly, because whenever you travel out of Australia, you've got to go to the US or Europe, you've got to tack on a day of travel each way, and that's one of the reasons I base myself in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's nice. It's nice to chat with you today. I was going to say this morning. I realise it's not this morning. Brett, for the sake of people who are watching today, we know that you're Aussie living in New York. We know that you're a futurist. We know that you're a speaker. But give us a little bit of your background. How did you come to be doing what you're doing today? Let's just sort of summarise who Brett King is.
Well, I started as a technologist. So back in the late 80s, early 90s, I was coding for a living. By all accounts, was fairly reasonable at that. Started my own business when I was 22 in the software business. Grew that to be a multinational company, software business. Sold that in the mid 90s. Bought an ISP, an internet service provider business, right at the start of the commercial internet. Got into that. That took me to Hong Kong, heading up e-business for Deloitte for the region, and then working for a digital agency called Modem Media, one of the first digital agencies that had big success during the .com. But throughout that process, I was also experimenting with writing. I'd written a couple of sci-fi books that I never got published, but we'll come back to that. And then, basically spent, over a decade in the trenches working with some of the biggest financial services companies doing digital transformation. Also, organizations like Cathay Pacific and so forth out of Hong Kong. Ended up moving to Dubai, where I started a company that, again, did digitally focused transformation and training. And then during the financial crisis, spent a year working on my first book that got published, which was called Bank 2.0, about disruption in the banking space. And that started me on a 10-year path to writing books. I'm working on my 7th right now, and I've enjoyed extraordinary success as a speaker on that. The success of the first book ended up giving me the vehicle to get some funding to create this mobile banking setup that we started in New York back in 2010. And then from there, I've sort of gone into the futurist angle. I run a radio show here in New York on WGCH 1460, WVNJ 1190, and Stream. And just generally have been focused on the futurist stuff over the last decade or so.
Excellent. And I have to say, it's lovely that just like me, I've got my living room background of the Opera House in the background, that we're clearly seeing your background of the skyline. You're obviously on your balcony at home. I do enjoy seeing that beautiful environment behind you. Looks nice.
It's the scene from Brooklyn. I'm actually on the East River, so it's a zoom trick, the background here, but otherwise you'd just be getting the apartment wall. But I sit on the East River in New York, so we've got the FDR. And I related to what Barbara was saying earlier, because when at the height of the coronavirus, it would just be ambulance after ambulance after ambulance going all night in New York. It was quite daunting to see that. Not only that, but of course, during shutdown, New York's one of the busiest cities in the world. During shutdown, you just don't have these cars on the road. So right now, a little bit of traffic's coming back, but it's sort of surreal being in New York in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, for sure.
Yeah, Brett, I wanted to ask you, you see things from a different perspective to the average person. You see things globally and you've got a wide angle view of the world. It has been a wild and weird and scary last few months. What has the world learnt since the middle of March 2020?
Well, seeing coronavirus in context with a number of other factors gives us some really interesting data points. First of all, obviously, we haven't experienced in this generation anything like coronavirus previously, where we've had the sort of restrictions that we have. So you see a lot of people pushing back against simple restrictions, such as wearing a mask and so forth, because they see this as an infringement on their individual rights. But coronavirus is really a test of that balance between individual rights and societal rights. And that's something that has sort of been emerging as a core issue for more than a decade now. If you look back to, say, the early 2000s, since the early 2000s till today, we've had about a 500% increase in mass protests around the world. And so when you look at the economic effects that we've seen as a result of coronavirus, it's identified some core weaknesses in the system. Primarily, massive problems with inequality. Here in the United States, the US is ranked 125th in the world in respect to equality, wage inequality. And so when you look at the protests and issues that have occurred recently around the death of George Floyd and so forth, a lot of the data points to the fact that this is not just about systemic racism in the United States, but systemic inequality as well. And if coronavirus has taught us anything, it's that when we have that system of inequality, that it creates massive uncertainty for the market and creates massive social costs that the world will go on to bear for some time. It just took 21 days from the first reported case of coronavirus in the United States to see the longest bear run in history on the stock market. And now the stock market's back. We still have about 40 million unemployed in the United States. That's for African American households, 1 in 5 African American households have no income right now. I mean, it really is a damning indictment on capitalism, because capitalism had no mechanism to mitigate these risks that we saw coming out of coronavirus. So we have to do better next time, and there will be a next time.
So you've just led me into the next question, talking about the next time. Everyone, certainly here in Australia, and I suspect everywhere, is talking about let's try everything we can to get back to normal, and when are we going to get back to normal. But you've actually said that from your perspective, you think the world will see more disruption and more change in the next 20 or so years than it has in the last 250 or so years. Can you give us an insight or your thoughts into what are those changes, what might be those changes that are lying just ahead of us?
So part of the trick with being a good futurist is being a good pastist, to see what lessons we can learn from the past. And there's this running joke about being a futurist means never being wrong today. But there is an element of science to this, which is what are the behavioral changes that we're likely to see that become more permanent features of society. If you look back at the Black Plague, for example, that radically changed society. It changed the way, it changed the equality, the mix of society. It changed the way people thought about disease and sanitation. The modern industrial age, a lot of the drivers came out of, the Black Plague. The Spanish flu, the same, with the first organized structure around public health and national hospital schemes that emerged out of the Spanish flu. So when you look at what's happening in coronavirus today, it's fairly clear that a lot of people have had to adapt to coronavirus by using online, buying their groceries using digital technology. We're doing conferences via Zoom and keynotes via Zoom and things like that. The real question is, which of these behaviors are likely to go back? Well, when it comes to things like online shopping or internet banking and things like this, it's unlikely that these things will go back in the medium term or even the longer term, because once people become used to the added convenience of digital, and these are quite habit forming quite quickly, it's only the diehard people that sort of want the social connection of a grocery store or a bank branch, as an example, that will go back to what they did previously. Certainly, that's going to increase the decline we already saw in sort of the physical retail space. Barbara was talking about Fifth Avenue, and the changes there as a result of the riots and the protests in the US. But long before coronavirus, we saw Amazon taking a big chunk out of the retail environment here in the United States. We've seen the same with Harvey Norman and digital sales in Australia, of course. And that's just accelerated. So that has impact on commercial real estate valuations. It has impact on the way people work in the future. Will we be going to an office? Will we have the option of working from home? Many of these behavioral changes will certainly become more permanent. So there's definitely going to be a new normal. It won't be back to the old normal.
Brett, we've got a question in that talks about the future, but it's really interested in the next 12 months. Thank you to Fiona for sending through this question. Fiona asks, Brett, where do you think we will be in 12 months' time? Do you think it'll be a V-shaped recovery or a long grind out?
Look, for many economies, it is going to be a V-shaped recovery, but certainly for the US, it's looking less likely for that. And part of the reason you have Hong Kong and Taiwan and South Korea that have had good sort of V-shaped recoveries, particular in respect to the treatment of coronavirus, is that their societies were quite compliant when it came to instructions from the government. You didn't have to remind them to wear masks and things like that, because many of those economies had suffered from SARS in 2003. So we do see a distinct difference between the economies who were psychologically and systemically prepared for coronavirus or for a pandemic, where they will recover faster. But economies like the United States, and Australia has done quite well in respect to coronavirus overall, as has New Zealand. But the United States, it may be well into 2021 before we have, a real clarity in respect to the recovery. The economic effects of this, we have not had this level of unemployment in the United States, certainly since the Great Depression. It's clear that's going to take a bit longer to recover. The small businesses, the restaurants, the service industry, businesses that have gone under during this period of coronavirus, they don't just snap back. You need new investors, new businesses to emerge before you can start reinstating those jobs that were lost. So my view is that even if we do get a handle on the virus itself with a vaccine or something similar, the economic recovery is certainly going to be a longer one. down for the United States. Now that gives China an opportunity to sort of step into the breach a bit there. And if China's economy booms in respect to the recovery, that may benefit the overall global economy, but would become more reliant on China. For Australia, Australia's already quite well correlated with the Chinese economy, so that may not be a significant impact for Australia. But in the US, it's going to require a real rethink.
Brett, we've got just over 2 minutes time, but I want to ask you a question, and a couple of people have actually asked me to ask you, given that you work in events, what are your thoughts as to the future of conferences and events? Let's not even go 10 years ahead. Let's not even go 5 years ahead. Just in the near future, how do you see the events industry transitioning and adapting?
Look, a few people are going to put their toe in to do physical events or in-person events, certainly in the latter half of this year. I think, certainly by next year, we're going to see a lot of the event business starting to come back. But at the same time, I think that the virtual element of events may become a permanent feature, at least optional for customers to join. If we play that out a couple of years or maybe 5 years into the future, I do think having the option, for example, to attend an event in person or in the virtual space using VR technology will certainly be an option. And so, if you have a speaker on stage, maybe wearing some tracking tracking markers, you could perform on stage as a speaker and appear in the virtual world on a virtual stage, just like you would in a real person event. So there's some really interesting tech like that that's coming out now, which is going to make in-person physical events less differentiated from virtual events. So I think what we're seeing through coronavirus is an acceleration of those technologies that make these virtual events compelling and potentially of strong value. So I think it's going to be emerging out of this a real choice for attendees and event organizers in terms of the way they deploy. It sounds on the face of it as probably a negative thing for events organizers, but also keep in mind that virtual events allow us to expand our audience significantly. So the other portion of this is going to be really about how we market events, how we get people to register those events to get broader audiences in the virtual space, rather than just rely on events in the physical space.
All right, Brett, we are pretty much out of time. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to answer this final question that's come through from a viewer. Hey, Brett, as a futurist, where do you see Brett King in 10 years' time? 10 seconds.
Well, I just bought an apartment in Bangkok, so hopefully sitting in Bangkok writing another book at a coffee shop.
Fantastic. Well, I hope that comes through for you, but I look forward to chatting with you also in person, face to face, shaking your hand, and hopefully introducing you at a conference sometime soon, somewhere. Brett,
absolutely.
Thank you so much
I'm
for your time.
I'm still waiting on the bottle of wine, though, guys. No, I'm just joking.
It's on its way. I'm told it is on its way. It'll be coming to you soon.
All right,
Brett, thank you very much for your time today. Thanks. Cheers, mate.